So just for introduction's sake, my name is Ben Watts, obviously the branch chair of the Bristol District CWU. I suppose really the idea of this is sort of me sort of highlighting the issues of mental health. Specifically for me, I've been dealing a lot with delivery. So speaking to sort of Rob as the person I would always ring and ask for some advice and support. I've been speaking to Rob and saying I'm really anxious about how many cases of mental health issues we've had, and you know, as a branch, as a rep, it's okay for us. We've got a bit of a support network, but just making sure we have some. What are we doing for our reps? So if we don't know what to do, I suppose we reach out and sort of get advice and support, and that's what's about being a union member is all about. So sort of less of me talking, and let me just sort of go through what we got today. So we've got a couple of guest speakers today. So Leilah King from Bristol Mind, mental health charity, and we've got Jamie McGovern, sort of the founder of the Southwest, founder of the CWU Northwest Mental Health Network, who's done exactly sort of what we're looking to do. Obviously, we're right down the bottom end of it. So, and we're going to get some kind of idea about where to start and potential for people to ask questions as well. So we are going to record the first couple of parts as well. So if it's all right, we're going to hand you straight over to Leilah and we'll go from there.
Oh, I've just got to unmute, Ben. Yeah. Hang on. That should work now.
Cool. Hey. Hello. Yes, I'm just going to chat to you in a second. Just going to share my slides. Bear with me. Cool. Can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. So I, as Ben and Rob just mentioned, my name's Leilah and I work for Bristol Mind. So I'm I'm primarily their fundraiser and networker, but before COVID and lockdown, I did go and do talks and do a lot of networking with different organizations like yourself. So that's why I'm here to speak with you today. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do locally and what services we provide, and also what new services we have brought in relation to COVID and the pandemic. At the end of the slide, I've got a link to our website, which you may already have, but I also would recommend that you check out our website because we've got a lot of information about information and signposting for other local mental health services, because yeah, we're not the only local organisation. So I wanted to flag that with you as well. So you've probably heard of Mind. So National Mind, we're essentially like a federation, and National Mind do a lot of campaigning and lots of kind of bigger projects across the UK, but we also have lots of local branches. So there's over 200, and obviously Bristol is Bristol and surrounding areas. And although we're associated with National Mind, we are independently funded and autonomously managed. So that means that we do our own fundraising and we deliver services locally according to the need. So our kind of mission statement, if you will, and our values are that we're seeking to make sure that nobody has to face a mental health problem alone, and we want to improve everyone's access to services, to raise awareness and promote understanding and end discrimination and stigma associated with mental health problems. So so I want to tell you about our services and our impact as well. So we've got quite a few services you can see in this list. So I'll talk you through some of them. So we provide advocacy services locally. So that's where, for example, if somebody has been sectioned under the Mental Health Act, we have a team of people who would go in and support that person and make sure that their voice is heard and that their rights are protected. And yeah, we have two teams of people that deal with different scenarios. The one I just mentioned, and also in situations where people are deemed incapacitated and they've lost their power of attorney and they've been in an accident or something like that. We go in and we support people in those circumstances as well. We also provide free helplines, so that's like emotional and support helpline, and it's a listening service, and that's free, and so people can call up for half an hour and just talk to somebody, and we find that that's an incredibly popular service because, as you can imagine, a lot of mental health services are really, really busy, or you have to pay and go private. We also provide a counselling service, which is means tested and heavily discounted. And that's, again, incredibly busy. And that's kind of one of our core things that we do, is that we run a counselling service ordinarily from the building, but not at the moment for obvious reasons. We also offer training in workplaces, and those are costed courses delivered by mental health. Well, I think you guys have probably done this, the mental health first aid training. So we provide that. You can get that through Bristol Mind as well. And we also have lots of services for harder to reach groups. So refugees and asylum seekers, we have specific counselling for people with PTSD. And we have support groups for female refugees in Bristol as well. So there are further things that we do, but as I said, the list is quite long. So I could talk to you about it all day, but I wanted to give you a sense of the different kind of things that we're doing locally and the support that we try and deliver. And we're continuing to deliver despite the pandemic and lockdown. So just to give you a quick sense of the typical impact. So each year, around 2,000 people call our helpline. Over 5,500 people contact us for information and advice. Over 1,000 people use our advocacy services. Over 1,000 people, around 1,000 people use our counselling services. And around 60,000 people visit our website to use our information and signposting service. So as you can imagine, this has all got a lot busier recently, but at the same time, we've not been able to deliver everything in a kind of face-to-face capacity, which has been quite challenging. So National Mind did a survey at the beginning of maybe the middle of the first lockdown, and it showed that more than half of adults, so 60%, and over 2/3 of young people felt that their mental health had suffered and worsened during lockdown, and many people developed new mental health problems that they'd never had before, or existing issues were exacerbated. And maybe like yourselves, and I speak for myself here as well, many of us have been really affected by having to work from home and the challenges that come up in that situation in terms of people not having enough space, or people having children working from home and that kind of thing, and that's been a real burden on people and our collective mental health. Specifically at Bristol Mind, we've seen quite a sharp increase in the use of our services. So Mindline, which is our main helpline that I mentioned, has seen a 60% increase in calls since lockdown. And there was a 10% increase in callers talking about isolation and loneliness. In August last year, 30% of callers were also really concerned with COVID-19. And throughout our other aspects of support, we've seen that 17% of people reference COVID-19 as a main contributing factor to their suffering mental health, and 32% of people expressed feelings of new anxiety, and 36% of people talked about loneliness or isolation, which has been, quite a big theme and challenge that we've been working with. So in response to that, we as an organisation had to undergo a bit of a shift to be able to deliver all of our services remotely. So the office is kind of pretty much closed. There's some things that are going on there now, which are more recently, but for the duration it's been shut. So we've had to switch our counselling and all of our other helplines in terms of people that are taking the call. We had to make sure that we could deliver this remotely, which was quite a challenge and took a good few weeks to get going. The other thing that we did was we started to look into different avenues of funding to try and develop new services quickly to help people during the sort of changing landscape. So here are a few of the things that we have done. So with our training service that would usually be delivered in person, so that's like mental health first aid training, for example, we tried to shift a lot of the content onto our YouTube channel, which is live, and that's free. So we've got a lot of wellbeing webinars and tips for wellbeing and that kind of thing are all up on our YouTube channel. We then converted all of our wellbeing training to webinars, and that is a lot of work as well, trying to shift that content and also the interactive elements of it that are hard to replicate when you're not in person. We expanded both of our helplines. So we went from 5 nights a week to 7 nights a week. We got some funding to do that, to make sure that if people could call every 7 days a week to get support. And we are still delivering counselling and our advocacy services. But with advocacy, we currently can't go into hospitals. But counselling we're delivering over Zoom and that kind of thing. And some of our support groups, like the refugee support group, Women Without Borders, we've been able to deliver that remotely. We also then created 3 new services, which are still running. So one is a free counselling service for people who are shielding. And then we also created counselling for BAME refugees, because it was indicated that they were at higher risk of developing mental health issues and not having access to support. And we also have now got a Green Spaces project, which is happening at St. Werburgh's Farm, and that's like a wellbeing group where people can meet and get outdoors and kind of reap the benefits of doing things like gardening and outdoor activities to help them with their well-being. So that's what we've been up to in a nutshell. I mentioned that obviously all of these services are available to everybody, and what I'd like to kind of direct you to have a look on our website as well, because it's got a really good list of all the other local mental health services and the support that's out there. Yeah, so that's it for me. So I'm going to stop sharing in case you had any questions, and then yeah.
Hi there. Yeah, sorry about that. Just swapping the host. So, thanks very much for the. No, it's unbelievable. Some of those numbers are just. It's sort of really especially the amount of annually people are using you, and also it's really interesting, especially at the moment, of the services and how we've had to adapt because of COVID as well. So if anyone's got questions towards Leilah, just making sure that they're not individual workplace questions related to Royal Mail, because obviously this is more of an open regarding mental health issues rather than workplace mental health issues, because obviously Leilah's not fair to put Leilah in a position to answer questions related to Royal Mail exactly. All right, so any indications, you've got the reactions button or the chat box, just indicate if anyone wants to come in at all. No questions at all. Ooh. Rob, do you want to come in at all on anything to? I mean, just double check this a minute. I'm just making sure because my screen froze. So definitely we've got no sort of questions at all. Oh yeah, sorry, I can see it now. David. So I'm going to bring in David's got a, so just ask you to unmute, David. So you should be able to unmute yourself now. Go for it, mate.
I do voluntary work around the BS10 area, and I speak to a lot of people saying like, oh, it's like the teenagers who have these mental health problems, not able to socialise. But I think the bigger picture is between the 18 and 24-year-olds that have the frustration of not getting that going out or anything as well, and they're getting pretty low and things like that. And then I feel that they don't get the support that they need, because they seem to be targeting with school kids and kids up to the age of 16 to 18. But the 18 to 24-year-olds, I feel they're not getting the support they need, because obviously I've got kids in that sort of age bracket myself, and as a wide parent, I'm sort of trying to lift their spirits up. I think always light at the end of the tunnel, but it's just like I just want to know what they could do, really.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, thank you. So yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good point. And yeah, I have a niece who's that age, and I feel really sorry for her as well. It's just such a difficult time for younger people, and there's so much uncertainty, and also just so much upheaval with their plans and their future. So I completely empathise with you. So I probably should have said, so Bristol Mind, we're a kind of we're adult mental health charity. So the best there's a really, really good charity in Bristol for younger people, and that's, I don't know if you've heard of it, and they're called Off the Record. Have you heard of them? Or oh, I think he's muted again. Okay, but yeah, what I would recommend, maybe getting in touch with Off the Record, or having a look at their website to see what services they have that are available. And they're a lot more, how do I put it without sounding really uncool, they're a bit more it's more targeted towards younger people. So it's lots of stuff on social media in terms of like how they deliver their services and how they engage with people. We're a little bit more old-fashioned, if you will. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, so that's what I'd recommend.
Yeah.
Is that okay for an answer, David? And obviously,
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks for that. I'll look it up. Cheers.
thank you, David. I'm going to bring in Rob. Rob's got a question.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Leilah. It was really good. It's shocking the sort of, I think we all knew it, but the levels of sort of mental distress people are suffering through COVID. I mean, I think it's something that's we're all very aware that it's around, but certainly I'd be the first to say that I don't have a great deal of sort of level of knowledge or understanding around a lot of the mental health issues. I just wondered if you think obviously it's difficult. You're only one organisation. Is there enough support, do you think, in society for mental health issues in general? I know it's a big question, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think so I don't think there is, sadly. I think that unfortunately it's quite an underfunded aspect and part of the NHS and the local services that we have, and there's been lots of cuts, and also there's kind of different sides to it. I think there's different problems and blockers, if you will. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding and underfunding around more serious, if you will, mental health issues. Like I was mentioning earlier about the advocacy services and people with things like psychosis, and I think that area of services is quite underfunded and not very glamorous in terms of the services that are available and people's awareness of it. I think my view is that people's awareness of well-being generally has definitely improved, and I think that organizations like yourself doing things like this, and lots of the corporates that we work with, are making a really big effort to try and have more conversations and to make people feel more open to treating a mental illness with a parity of a physical illness. So I think in some ways, culturally, we're headed in the right direction, but there's some serious funding issues, similarly to the NHS. Yeah, I don't know if I hope that answers your question.
That's really good. I'll just bring in Rob there as well, but I think that gives a detailed.
Yeah, brilliant.
Rob just dropped a big question on you, but I think you've answered that really, really well. Has anyone else got any questions at all towards? Oh, Alex Bradley, if I just give me 1 second, Alex, I shall bring you in. Just should be asking to unmute, Alex. Go for it.
Yeah, I've done that anyway. Yeah, thank you, Leilah. It was brilliant. I mean, I don't know, well, Ben, you know this very well, but I mean, my daughter has extreme anxiety, hasn't been at school for a year, all the rest of it. And we deal with a lot of those agencies. I mean, the one thing that's been, I don't know if I'm going to ask a question at the end of this, I'm probably just going to say stuff. But I think the thing is, it's like, the one thing that I find quite astounding is what they're trying to do with, you know, the chief executive of the NHS and Matt Hancock basically the minister getting more power back, which is when the first, you know, during the Tories rule, they actually devolved that power out. And it seems crazy in some respects because, I mean, I think we're lucky with my daughter and the fact is, but we have to fight tooth and nail for it. And I think that also brings immense pressure onto the carers as well. So we've got to care for the carers, which is becoming, I think, a big issue. Do you have any thoughts on that at all? I mean, you know, because you mentioned all the cuts that have been done, and I'm very aware of what cuts have happened, but I just wondered what you thought from your perspective.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, I think that it's. I just think that there's a tricky. What's the word? There seems to be a lot of dysfunction in terms of how they separate the tender and services. Like if we're talking specifically about mental health services, there's a lot of. I think my understanding is that things come up for review quite regularly, and that people there's this element of I don't want to make it too political, maybe I already have, but there's an element of that privatization where things are being bidded for, and I think that there's two sides of the coin, isn't there? Because you could argue that if it's competitive, it improves the service, but then you have a problem with the longevity because it keeps coming up so quickly, if that makes sense. So maybe there's a risk. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. One thing I would point at, it was a while ago now actually, but there was a lot. There was various groups. I think there was a group called SWAN, which was basically about mental health. Users actually made a group with mental health professionals to actually sort of try and say this is what we need, and I think that I think a lot of campaigning groups have actually changed some of the landscape over the last few years just for the awareness. I mean, it's not actually changed provision totally, but I think that so it's worth looking around at what groups. I mean, you know, there was DPAC as well, which was disabled person stuff. But I mean, the thing is, it was all kind of wrapped up. But the fact is, I think it is still quite a campaign somehow. Anyway, leave it there.
Alex, thanks very much for those questions. Right, I know there's no new personally. I know what troubles you've had. It's interesting to hear.
You've muted yourself, Ben. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, mate. Sorry, Alex. Thanks very much. I was just saying thanks for the questions, Alex. I know this is sort of relevant to your case as well. So I'm hoping they appreciate those answers there, Leilah. And anyone else got any questions from Leilah? Sam Fry, bring you in, Sam.
Yeah, evening, Leilah. Yeah, my question is, I don't know if you've been asked this before, but is there anything you can do in your daily lifestyle or things to try and, try and stop, try and help prevent mental health? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Is there anything you can do to try and, before you reach that point, is there anything you can do to help not reaching that point? I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's a really good question, and that's the way that they frame part of like the bigger story is like you use the word prevent, so it's kind of like preventative care or preventative awareness and understanding. I can signpost you, but I don't want to just because that's not my area of expertise. I wouldn't want to give out too much specific advice just because that's not my background. But we do have some resources. I think I mentioned on our website and on our YouTube channel, and they kind of go around this theme or philosophy of the five ways to well-being, the 5 ways to well-being, and that's a good thing. And that's kind of, I think accredited is really the right word, but that's endorsed by the NHS as well. And I can't remember them all, but if you have a look at them, it's like stay connected. It's got like 5 different principles to try and help take care of your well-being, and like you said, prevent the onset of stress or other things that can develop into a bigger problem.
Thank you, Leilah. Yeah, appreciate it.
Leilah. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for the question. Anyone else got any questions at all? Because I know. Right, I think, Leilah, just, I know we don't plan on keeping you the whole meeting, but I just wanted to say thank you from, obviously, from the branch as a whole, because this is something we're not experts on by any means. That's why it's really important to see what goes on in Bristol from people like yourself, and also the interesting part is relating that to what's going on in our workplace, and I think you've given a really good insight, and also I think for me the stats you were talking about related to COVID as well is unbelievable, and we've definitely seen that in our workplace. So really appreciate your time. Thanks very much, and thank you very much. All right.
Thanks, guys. Good luck with the rest of your meeting. Cheers.
Thank you. Right, I'm gonna ask Jamie. Jamie, you can introduce yourself, mate. So this obviously we have 2 guest speakers. We've obviously heard from Leilah from Bristol Mind, and just going to bring in Jamie McGovern from. Jamie, you bring in yourself, mate. You go for it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Jamie McGovern. I'm basically a CWU area safety rep in Merseyside. I'm also one of the CWU National Mental Health First Aid tutors. So a tutor, mental health first aid, accredited mental health first aid with MHFA England. Just recently done a pilot course for the CWU. Done a couple of classroom courses on that, and the feedback's been really good. And we have had a bit of a mental health problem across the Northwest region, and I was one of the people who helped set up the first mental health network in the country for the CWU. That was the Northwest Mental Health Network. So I think Rob was going to share some slides, and I'll talk you through some of the things we've done, and some of the things that have been beneficial for us. And like I mentioned on a call to the Scottish region the other day, you can actually learn from our mistakes as well as learning from some of the good stuff we've done. So the first slide really is just an impact slide, about the fact that it is, often invisible. What's happening on the surface, is not. What's happening underneath the surface is not always obvious on the top of the surface. So I say that's just really an impact slide. Next slide, please, Ben, if you don't mind. So basically, this is just an example of what we've been dealing with. This is an example of a note we found in a Royal Mail van in the Whittle. And I don't know whether you can read the writing itself, but it says, considering leaving this world behind, such a struggle as I see, no hope I can find. And that was found on a note in a Royal Mail van in the Whittle. And obviously, because of the way our network works, we need to get support into that unit and have a guided conversation with that individual. I think that image there shows just some of the things we're dealing with right now. The fact that someone has got suicidal ideation and actually took time to write it on a note. And thankfully, it was found scrambled up by another person who thought it was actually a card that had not been delivered, opened it up, and then realised it was, there was a significant issue there. So what we do when we find information like this, we do what they call guided conversations. So if we put the next slide on, please, Ben. The guided conversation really is an opportunity to listen in a non-judgmental way. So this is a Royal Mail standard, the guided conversation, but it's actually based on a HSE standard. And the HSE standard is called the Talking Toolkit. So in our region, for example, with the way our network works now, this is one of our first go-to documents. It's a really good document. It's probably underused in Royal Mail Group. It's called a stress risk assessment, but actually identifies as the guided conversation for stress. And what this does, it asks a series of scripted questions. And basically, at the end of those questions, you then, you put down the answers in response, and then create an action plan based on what the answers of the individual is. So this has worked really well for us in terms of the guided conversation. It's available to everyone who works in Royal Mail, but as I said before, it's probably underused. The one good thing about this document is when we've used it, it's really been a benefit to our member, but also there's a mutual benefit for the business as well, because in 80% of the cases, people do stay in work. So say, I think in the last, something like the last 80 guided conversations we've done, it's something like 62 people have stayed in work and not been forced to go off because they then have an action plan at the end of this conversation. So we put the next slide on, Ben, please. This is just identifying where this Royal Mail template has come from. So the guided conversation for stress was set up in 2016 by Judith Grant, but she based it on the HSE's Talking Toolkit. It's basically the same conversation. It's a scripted conversation, but this is the HSE standard. So in Northwest region, say for example, if there's persons from Santander or Capita or maybe BT Openreach, this would be their go-to kit. It would be the Call to Talking Toolkit in Royal Mail. It would be called the Guided Conversation on Stress. But I think whichever mental health organisation or charity or support organisation you go to, the benefit of having these conversations is huge. We call them a starter conversation. They've really been quite pivotal for us in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of identifying people covered under the Equality Act, people who need reasonable adjustments, but it all has to start somewhere. And this is why these scripted guided conversations are really good, because you tend to get to the actual crux of the problem. So next slide, please, Ben. So I just mentioned there, we call it a domino effect. So it has to start somewhere. And with these guided conversations, this is what it can lead to. This is called the domino effect. So you can see the first domino is the guided conversation, which then can lead to occupational health referral. It can then lead to a mental health disability being identified, which then in turn leads to a risk assessment, further signposting support. We also signpost to external organisations as well as feeling first class. Obviously reasonable adjustments, and I'll talk about that in a second, how easy this is. And most importantly for the individual, Equality Act protection. That's massively important. The success of these guided conversations is there's an organisation there in the bottom right called Five-A-Side Chess, who we work with, and they're an anti-suicide charity. And they've now started to produce guided conversations for ex-armed forces people, because they've seen the level of success you can have just by having these starter conversations. And the last domino there, really massively important. Equality Act protection is huge. We need to make sure we establish that for those people who have a long-term mental health disability. But as I say, the first port of call is the first starter conversation. So next slide, please, Ben. And you can see this is these starter conversations are supported by the likes of Mental Health First Aid England, because if anyone's familiar with mental health first aid, you'll see one of the key identifiers in terms of mental health first aid support is the opportunity to listen and communicate in a non-judgmental way. And that's what these stress conversations do. They create that opportunity. But obviously that's just a slide from myself as an MHFA tutor. You know, the ALGE acronym may be familiar with a lot of people on here, but it does create that L for listening. It's massively important. Next slide again, please, Ben. So as mentioned there on that domino slide, it's about identifying as well for our members when it is a disability. So obviously a mental health condition becomes a disability if it's considered long-term and it has an effect on your day-to-day activity. So if it's foreseeable that it's going to last 12 months or it has lasted 12 months, then that person will be covered under the 2010 Equality Act, which is, a really good piece of legislation. And people do feel much more protected when you tell them that, because in Royal Mail, for example, you then create what they call a workplace adjustments agreement, which is like a disability passport for them. And people do feel so much more protected by having that security, knowing that they are covered under this piece of legislation. So next slide again, please, Ben. So again, there's the particular acts that we talk about, under the Equality Act 2010, obviously section 4, 6, 15, 20 and 21. Normally sections 15 and 20 and 21, we will sort of make reference to them if we end up going to tribunals in these cases, because discrimination arising from disability and duty to make adjustments and failure to comply with that duty is something that we do reference if our people aren't being protected by this piece of legislation. So I'll get on to how many risk assessments we've done in a second. So next slide, please, Ben. And it's also covered under health and safety legislation as well. I know Mike's on the call as ASR, but obviously these are our sort of go-to documents. Myself and Mike will be referencing these all the time, like the Health and Safety at Work Act, the general duties of the employer, and also the management of health and safety at work regulations. And guided conversations are classed as risk assessments. They're called stress risk assessments. So again, covered off under these pieces of legislation as detailed on the screen here. So next slide, please, Ben. And this is just one of those power slides about the disability risk assessment process, how often it should occur. Now, it should be reviewed annually. Once you do it once for an individual, you should review it annually. And if that person does have a disability, then the workplace adjustments agreement, once completed, that then triggers an annual review. So once the manager puts that onto the system, every single year, this person's disability risk assessments will then be reviewed. I'll get onto in a second about some of the easy adjustments you can make, but that's just basically, that's a Royal Mail slide, and it's about their disability risk assessment process, how it should be done. Next slide, please, Ben. So this is really about, it's actually not that hard to make adjustments. I think that I've got to try and debunk the myth that mental health risk assessments are difficult, and they're really not. I'll example a case in a second about how easy these are to do. But one beauty about mental health risk assessments, you have a person at the opposite end of the table to you, telling you the answers. Like, for example, if we're doing like a fire risk assessment, you'll go around and you're searching for the answers or you're searching for the hazards. With mental health and disability risk assessments, you've got a person at the other end of the table and you're asking them questions and you're getting the answers in return. So if the skill is listening, and if you listen to that individual, the actual approach supporting with that disability is pretty easy. So next slide, please, Ben. So I'm just going to share an example of a reasonable adjustment. This is mental health disability covered under the Equality Act. It's quite common. Certainly I've discovered that over the last certainly 5 years. OCD is really, really common, especially in Royal Mail Group. It says here 12 out of every 1,000 people are affected, but we have some people who have really chronic OCD who work for us. And I'm going to example one case in a minute where OCD was referenced and the manager didn't know what to do with this individual. And I'll explain how easy it was to put an adjustment in. So if we just purely think about reasonable adjustments, if you pop the next slide on, Ben, please. This is a colleague who basically, he had chronic OCD and he was what they call an anti-clockwise theorist. So basically, when you actually think about this, there's a lot of reasoning in there. It's been around since Victorian times. And this particular colleague, he had to work in an anti-clockwise direction when he was delivering mail. And because his loops were set up in a clockwise direction, he was struggling. He was re-prepping all the delivery. His OCD meant he had to, function in an anti-clockwise direction. We'd read stuff online about anti-clockwise theory. And, even when he went out and walked the dog, he'd walk anti-clockwise. When he went out to a shopping centre with his wife, he'd go around anti-clockwise. And all we wanted to do was allow him to work with his condition. But he was an anti-clockwise theorist and with his OCD. So the next slide, please, Ben. So this is what we did in terms of supporting with adjustment. So as I say, the member of the staff had chronic OCD, had to work in an anti-clockwise direction. He believed it was safer, it was quicker, it was easier. The big problem was the problems were in the office where his colleagues and his manager were just not at all receptive to his needs. And we had to go in there. And this guy became very bereft of friends very quickly, became isolated. We went in there, we did a disability risk assessment, guided conversation, and we asked for an adjustment to plan his delivery to allow him to work in anti-clockwise directions. This is a slide from a couple of months ago. That person has now spent 2.5 years in the business without absence since his reasonable adjustment. Now, if you're thinking about an obsession with anti-clockwise theory, the image on the right sort of explains it. This is why Victorians, the merry-go-rounds go round in an anti-clockwise direction. It's because to do with the heart, and it's how it collects deoxygenated blood. It's the same reason why athletes run around the clock anti-clockwise. It's the same reason why some horses will run faster going anti-clockwise. There's a lot of centrifugal force in it. And this became this person's obsession, really, and it's impulsion that he wanted to work in an anti-clockwise direction. All we did was go in and allow that to happen by putting adjustments in to allow him to work in an anti-clockwise direction on delivery. Now, it didn't matter to Mrs. Jones at number 42 whether she got him going clockwise or going anti-clockwise. She still got a male. So we believe that was a reasonable adjustment, and it's proven by the fact he's spelled so long now without a further absence. So that's just one example anyway. Next slide, please, Ben. So some of the things to think about in terms of adjustments, if you do start to get your network going, making sure the individuals feel fully involved, and it's about them influencing the decisions. The worst thing you can do is pretend to listen to someone and not act on what they tell you. You have to listen, and you have to create the action plan or the adjustments around what that person is telling you. And obviously, once it's implemented, you need to make sure the adjustment can change as the person's condition can change. And also, another thing, mental health medication, the likes of sertraline, for example, that does have side effects, which needs to be put into the risk assessment to make sure that those person's side effects are dealt with. But again, in all of this, one of the key issues is making sure privacy and confidentiality is kept throughout. So that's a really key message. Next slide, please, Ben. Just some of the things that have worked for us. Quiet rooms have been, quite useful for us in terms of us trying to promote mental health in the workplace. What we always do in our region is that we make sure every single awareness day there's prime focus on that. So the likes of February just gone, we had Time to Talk Day. You've got Mental Health Awareness Week coming up in May. You've got Suicide Prevention Day in September. These are like key awareness days throughout the year where you can, put information out there. Quiet rooms are ideal places for that. There's a lot of belief in quiet rooms now because, every now and again you need a quiet go-to place. And we've seen quiet rooms that are basically just glorified broom cupboards. And we've seen fantastic quiet rooms, but all they are is that an escape area from the main floor, whereby sometimes it can be boisterous and rowdy and people just need a quiet escape. The beauty about these quiet rooms is you can flood those rooms with information. So next slide, please, Ben. There's an example of a quiet room, and it's a quiet area. It's just basically a cordoned off area in one of our delivery offices in the back room. Unfortunately, this came about because one of our colleagues completed suicide, Phil, the postie there. And as a consequence of that, we wanted to do something in that unit in the quiet area, and a quiet room was set up just so that people had an option to go into these back areas in the back rooms and see what information was already there. you don't know if you can see it on the board there, but one of the our signposts and booklets is up there as well. It doesn't just concentrate on Royal Mail support, it concentrates on external support in the Northwest area. So that's just an example of how easy it is to set up a quiet space in your offices. Next question, next slide, please, Ben. And that's the type of information that, you can display. It is a key area, these quiet areas. If you don't have an option for a quiet room, maybe set up a wellbeing board or a mental health board and just start to put information up there, just so that people can start to access that information. You'd be surprised how easy it is. I mean, what we do is we put a poster out there as well for every awareness day, and there's a QR code on there. And what I'll do is I'll share some of our information with Ben and with Rob and Mike after the call. And we count our QR codes now, how many times these posters have been hit. So the actual time to talk day poster has been hit 1,000 times in the Northwest area, over 1,000 times, just by people walking past with a mobile phone, clicking on a QR code, and you have access to information. And that's what these quiet rooms are really good for as well. Next slide, please, Ben. I think we're nearly there. Yeah, it's not just a concept that has come from us working in Royal Mail. These are all out there. These quiet rooms and quiet spaces are available. I know not many of us are going to airports right now, but there's a good quiet room in Liverpool Airport, and you'll see quiet rooms and quiet spaces in lots of places now. It's become basically a safe haven. If people are experiencing panic or anxiety, a quiet place really has it's been a benefit, huge benefit to us in the Northwest region. We've got them popping up in lots and lots of units now. Next slide, please, Ben. And these are just suggestions for the quiet places if you do want to start up getting your network going. When it comes to rules, less is more. There's no formal rooms needed for a quiet room. It doesn't have to be a specific layout or a specific size. It's just a go-to space. Avoid allowing the rooms to be used for other purposes. It's a quiet room. Hey, that's exactly what it is. Get people to respect the rules. Involve staff in how they want the quiet room to look. They can get involved in creating it. Not all employees will use the room at all times, but those who do really do tend to consider it as vitally important. We've got a really quiet room in one of our offices. When I say a small quiet room, I should say, but the amount of times it gets used, it's almost used on a daily basis because people really do value it. And as I said previously, include information on the notice board. It's a free area to put that information up. Make it basically a central point for mental health information. Next slide, please, Ben. And that is basically about it with the slides, because this is just a little, power slide. When I becomes we, illness becomes wellness. It's just really about, if you can, trying to create that network. In terms of the numbers, our network has grown quite significantly over the last 2 years. We've now got a lot of mental health first aiders, a lot of mental health ambassadors, mental health advocates. And if the desire is there, and you've got a lot of like-minded people, you'd be amazed at what you can achieve. I mean, I'll say this now. 5 years ago, we never had anyone covered under the 2010 Equality Act for a mental health disability. In January, we had our 100th person covered under the 2010 Equality Act for mental health disability. So it just shows what can be done. So we've now got 100 people covered under the 2010 Equality Act for long-term mental health disabilities. So that just shows you what can be done. You can't do it on your own. You really can't. What you need is a group of like-minded people. And if you've got that on this call, you'll be amazed at what you can achieve. And it's probably the most rewarding group I've been involved in terms of our network. They're a fantastic group of people to work with, and they're a fantastic support as well, because they end up supporting each other. So if you've got that desire and that commitment in your own branch and your own region, you'd be surprised what you can achieve. Myself and Mark Holt, we also do a workshop on the guided conversation that I've mentioned. And if that's something that your region wants, then we can do that for you. And we have a guest speaker who comes on, and his name's Tony Dunbar. And basically he's a colleague who's been supported through his mental health journey. And he talks about how the guided conversation has really helped him. So as I say, if there's enough desire there, and there's enough commitment there, you can start to make huge inroads into supporting your colleagues. And I think that's it for me, really, Ben.